leading, and I didn't record until right now, so apologies on that. We're just making jokes about technology. I'm not the best. I have the pleasure of leading this panel and the series that we're going through this semester. If you missed the first one, we have the recording of it, is the Business and Esports and Careers. This one I am very excited about. We are focusing on the Alaska esports scene, and we are joined by two people who have explicit knowledge in the area of Alaskan esports, which is an area that I admittedly am not an expert in, so I'd like to lean on people who know much more than I do. So I will get to them in a moment, but first, want to thank the School of Management. Want to thank UAF Esports as well as CTC Content Creation who are helping us put this whole thing on. And if you haven't yet seen it, well, we do have two more panels, one coming in March and one coming in April. The one in March being around culture, stigmas, and stereotypes in esports. And then the one in April coming is going to be around coaching in esports. So without further ado, I will talk a little bit more after this, but I will first let our two guest panelists join us. And before I do that, I will say we did have two other guests lined up that had previous engagements that came up at the last second. So I know Mark really wanted to be on from NFHS, but his son is playing in the state championship basketball game tonight. I think that was unexpected. So cheers for them, and hopefully they have some good news tonight as well. So I will turn it over. I will give it to Mike first. Mike, can you please introduce yourself, explain your role a little bit, and then I want you to tell everybody what your favorite video game is.
Pick one favorite. I'm gonna have to cheat on that one a little bit, yeah. But the rest I might be able to do. So yeah, I'm Mike Juell. I am the UAF Esports coordinator. So I'm kind of in charge of helping get the program developed here, and connecting with other schools, other educators, and kind of helping oversee what's happening in the esports scene around the state. And if you're gonna make me choose one, I'll go with my most recent favorite, so like a modern favorite. Played Horizon Zero Dawn, and that was a really sweet game. If anybody hasn't played it, it was one that was not on my radar, but it was super fun.
All right, Heath, and you can choose an old game or a new game. If you're like me, it's more of a classic style, but I'll give you the floor.
Hi everybody, my name is Heath Day. I'm the Education Program Manager for GCI. I work exclusively with schools and libraries across the state. And as esports has become a sanctioned sport in Alaska, I've been working with schools and figuring out how they can get onboarded and get their teams up and running. And as far as games go, I've been thinking about this. I'm going to give you guys an honest, transparent answer here. My favorite game is basketball. My playing in the world of esports is very, very limited. I'm an old school coach of more traditional sports, but I will share some of my insight from that and why I think esports is such a great thing for Alaska today. But basketball is my game. That's what I played, so that's what I got to stick with.
Hey, listen, I live in that world, in esports basketball and in traditional basketball, so I can appreciate that. Before I dive into questions, I do want to say real quick, the goals that we had outlined for this, in case you were looking for a little more guidance on what's going on. We really are looking at educating the group on growing the esports scene in Alaska and why that's important and what is important about that with Alaska specifically. Shine a light on what the future holds for gaming in Alaska as we look forwards. And then two, for those of us on the call who are interested in potentially working in esports down the line, provide some guidance on opportunities that exist in the world of esports and gaming, and specifically in Alaska, things that students can get involved with. So with that preface, I guess my first question I'd like to ask, and Heath, I'll start with you. When we talk about the culture or the landscape of esports in Alaska, why is it different in Alaska? It's growing everywhere, but in Alaska specifically, why is it different in the growth pattern, and why is it more important in Alaska than in other states?
Yeah, there's a lot of different facets to that, and I'll try to be succinct here. That primarily in Alaska, in rural Alaska in particular, there's 4 sports that go on during the school year. Basketball is the last one, and that ends in March. And then you have the remainder of the school year when testing is happening, and most kids, there's no activities to keep them engaged. And so for one, the window of opportunity in rural Alaska to have something to keep the kids engaged and that doesn't require them to travel, which is the second big piece. Being able to compete from a remote location when travel costs are just crazy expensive. I know some teams that just to get to Anchorage from their community, it costs them $18,000. And they're not playing anybody in Anchorage. So then they got to pay to get somewhere else after they've gotten here. And then I live in Anchorage and then come back through. So the costs are just crazy high. So to be able to compete without having to travel and have a season when there's nothing else going on, but kids really need to still have some motivation to be engaged in school and in attendance and their grades, to me, it's a perfect fit for where esports can fit in the season and why it's important.
Mike, you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I'll chime in. I echo all that. As last year, I was the high school Kodiak, and yeah, it happened all the time where like you'd look at, oh, the volleyball team got weathered out and couldn't go to their tournament, and it was sad and whatnot, or just travel was expensive. But the other thing that I think is really nice about esports is it doesn't require the same. There's not a football field you have to maintain. There's not a basketball court. It can be a few students in the library on computers, and you can make a team, and it doesn't necessarily require that same initial investment that a lot of other programs might make more intimidating. So like that ease of access, I think. And then, yeah, just knowing not just the cost, but just how far away all of our schools are, even some of them not even on the road system, right? So just being able to compete in ways that we haven't been able to compete before, I think makes that really cool. But then I also think Alaska has some similarities with what's going down in the lower 48 too. Like we're following a lot of these same trends. We're able to compete with schools down there. And I think it's kind of cool that, we're not necessarily behind just because we're a little bit more removed. We're right there in the thick of the esports scene.
Can I add one more thing onto that you kind of touched on, Mike, is another unique piece for Alaska is the numbers. When you look at the student count in a lot of these schools in Alaska, there's only a dozen students maybe in the entire high school. I know on the basketball side of things, there are teams that are co-ed just because they don't have enough boys or enough girls to make a team on one side or the other. So the ability to have co-ed teams and to be able to even partner where you can have a team. I know in some areas they're doing teams that aren't at the same school. They're crossing over and they're joining students from two schools to make a team. The ability to still have practice and to still be able to collaborate together as a team, again, unique to esports and very pertinent for what the layout is in Alaska.
So Mike, I'm sorry, Heath, I want you to expand on that a little bit. I know that a lot of what your role is focused on youth development and in high school age, and if not a little younger, as well as some of the later stage where Mike is more focused on the university system. When you talk about the importance of high school athletics, high school clubs and involvement, esports seems to be one that bridges that gap for students who may not be in athletics. Can you talk a little bit about why esports and the opportunity in esports is so important to some of the youth development in Alaska?
As an old school coach, I would say that the most important things that we wanted students to get out of their time playing wasn't just the physical attributes of being able to score or run faster or jump higher, but it was that collaboration piece and learning how to have good communication, learning how to respond to conflicts within the team and from an external source. All of those skills that are real life skills as you become adults and you have to apply in your families and your workplaces, things like that. And so to me, this is a unique opportunity for kids to have that exposure, but not have to have some of the things that are restrictive in other areas. For example, going back to the sports season again, in rural Alaska, most of you start out with cross-country running, and then there's volleyball, wrestling, and basketball. Those are their sports options. So you already are pretty limited in those. And sometimes you can kind of override the principles if you're just bigger, faster, and stronger. You don't necessarily have to work harder, and you don't have to collaborate with your teammates, and you can just be bigger, faster, and stronger. And in esports, that's neutralized. somebody might be better than somebody else, but they still are going to have to work with their teammates. They're still going to have to problem solve. They're still going to have to do things that really are the goal of what we want kids to learn in sports. That to me is probably the biggest reason that got me to shift my thinking initially when I first started hearing about esports, and why I got behind the idea that, yeah, this is something we should be doing in all of our schools, and it is something that needs to be sanctioned by the state.
You're spot on. And I think that was something that Mark Koski from NFHS probably would have hit on pretty heavily in this setting. But what I do want to say in addition to that, and then I'll throw it to you, Mike, is that what you're saying is it's the importance of mentorship. And Mike, you and I had a great conversation last week about mentorship in gaming. If you want to add anything on to what Heath said, or if you want to talk a little bit about the importance of mentorship at any level in esports or gaming, please, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I definitely want to jump in, but I'll touch on all of that. I think like just thinking about my sample down in Kodiak, which, I'm not saying is, do a scientific research paper on, but we filled, when Alaska sanctioned high school esports, we very quickly filled full teams for all 3 teams. And then I just kind of did like a quick show of hands. Remember one day, it was like, who here in this room, is this the first time you've done an after school activity, right? We had like some high school seniors in there. So we're talking, they've had oodles of time to get involved in school stuff. Over 90% of those students, that was their first time doing something in relation to their school, and what they were called school spirit, teamwork, and all those things go with it. We engaged a demographic that had just been kind of neglected for a long time. And I know just from kind of just the cursory conversations I had with other people around the state, they were having like similar numbers where they were having students who had never felt that there was a club or an organization or a team that they really wanted to be a part of. And all of a sudden they saw something that was, kind of spoke to them and they were really excited about. That being said, getting to the mentorship part, I think it's really tricky. And we've got a long way to go because both of you as traditional sports guys, like there's a lot of people around that, you can walk around the school and talk to people about basketball and they know how, basketball is going to work. A lot of these students are teaching themselves how to do this esports stuff, and that can be really cool because it really empowers them to help out with other students. But if they've picked up bad habits and the internet is a place where there are lots of people who they say things that you don't need to say and they're toxic and they're just not nice, it can lead to a lot of really bad habits of just, people quitting in the middle of games and all these things that become acceptable in the world of esports. And it kind of has to be like an unlearning of that, all right, well, now that we're taking this more standard sports mindset of, you've got a team that's depending on you and all these things, it's totally a mind shift because most of these kids have been playing, it's not necessarily they're playing with, the rest of their family. They're just playing with their friends who are also, preteens who are going through the same struggles and learning the same things, but they don't necessarily have those great role models. So I think it's really important, and I guess I'm biased here at the college level, that, we start to see that trickle down effect of, college students who can kind of show high school teams how to work together as a team, and it's okay to learn these things, and it's okay you don't know how to do those things. And then by proxy, high school teams that are mentoring middle school programs, because right now it's kind of unique in that there isn't a feeder program, right? I can't look down to the the 5th grade recruits for Rocket League and figure out what a team's going to look like in some school in a couple of years. It's all just kind of being made up by the students who are passionate about it and the adults who are willing to kind of help support them. So I think that mentorship angle is just going to be really important to see that sustainable growth, not just in the state, but just across esports in general.
That's a great point. And you kind of bring up the next part of that I wanted to touch on is expansion and growth, and how do you continue to build on this? So Mike, I'll stick with you, and then Heath, I'll throw it to you. But how do you increase participation, whether that's at middle school level, high school level, university level? How do you increase participation, especially when in the gaming community, I would say the stereotype is that it's people who are probably a little bit less likely to be a social butterfly. It's a little bit more of an introverted area as a generalization. So how
Sure.
do we increase participation in gaming at every level?
I think the number one thing that we need to do, there's a lot of things I can answer with that, but if I had my magic one solution that I could push through, I think that there's this mindset of when people talk about esports now and why students can get involved. We talk about the scholarships and we talk about people going pro. And just like when we talk about it at the NCAA level, that's not necessarily the reason we tell students, athletes to get involved, right? We don't say it's because you're going to be a millionaire. We say it's, it's a fun, healthy community thing that you can do. But I think the esports is just so intimidating right now. Like if I hopped onto a game of League of Legends for the first time, and for those who don't know, it's a 5-on-5 team game. You have to choose from over 100 heroes. They all have special powers. It is so overwhelming. And you're not just playing with other people who are learning the game. You're playing with people who already probably know the game. And maybe they'll be nice to you and help you learn. Maybe they're going to be mad at you for being the weak link on the team. And that's just really intimidating. It's not the same as I can go down to the soccer field and kick a soccer ball around with the friends and kind of get a feel for it and not feel that pressure. With esports, you just kind of have to jump in. And I think that it kind of goes back to the mentorship thing of having these avenues because the students who are going to play esports, like when I formed these teams, it's not like I had to go out and recruit. I literally sent out an email to a couple of my former high school students at lunch, and I was like, hey, did you know Alaska took this on? Who's interested? Later that afternoon after school, they're all banging on my door trying to get the team going. So we've already got those students. We don't need to worry about those students sticking around. They might have to learn how to work as a team or whatever. But I think it's finding those avenues for people who they hear esports and it's just kind of like this intimidating, I have a friend who does that, but they spend like 8 hours a day doing it and they have all these fancy notes and use all these fancy language. I think it's just about making it accessible and saying, you know what, like you can go on there with your friends and have some fun. It doesn't have to be this high elite level play. It can be a recreational thing you do on a Wednesday night because it's dark, it's rainy, and you don't feel like doing something else. And I think that when you start getting those people to be more interested, I mean, some of them will stay the course and they will become those next varsity players. But you still kind of expand the field of who knows what's going on, who's going to be interested in following that team. And cheering them on, excited for the high school announcements of hearing how the team did that day. I think kind of getting that wider pool of people who understand what's going on and interested and not just kind of scared and skittish when they hear the term esports. I think that's going to be the next step forward, at least from the realm that I've seen.
Heath?
That's a great question. My brain goes a completely different place with this. Before I go in, I want to clarify. This whole group is through the UAF business program, correct?
Yep, the sport and recreation business. Yep.
Okay, so I'm going to go more of a business aspect of this with you guys. And my front, working for GCI as an internet provider, is thinking about the infrastructure of how do we make this more accessible. Okay, so rather than just recruiting the kids, let's back up and make sure that we have the things in place that kids need to be able to participate and to play. So one of the things that I've been doing is the last couple of years at the Science and Technology conference that happens every year for schools, we've showcased esports in the GCI booth, where we've had schools and their teams come and play and expose all of the teachers and tech directors from other school districts so they can see what esports is. It's not just a word anymore, but they can watch kids play and they can see, oh, this isn't all first-person shooter, everybody's dying, and then they're going to come replicate that in our school. It's the number one fear that we hear over and over and over again, right? So exposing them to the fact that, oh, that's not what this is. This is something different. Well, what is it? What would my school need to be able to have a team? In Kodiak, where Mike was talking about, they have the technology and the network capabilities that it was pretty easy plug and play. There are a lot of places in the state of Alaska that it's still not easy to get a team up and running. And one of the things that Alaska as an organization has tried to do from a statewide sports is to think about classifications. Whereas in a normal traditional sports, you classify based on the number of students, right? So you have 1A, 2A, 3A, 4A based on student population. One of the things they've been looking at in terms of how do we classify, maybe it's based on your connectivity. So if you are connected via satellite instead of via, fiber, no matter how good you are, there's a huge discrepancy there in what you're going to be able to do in the game, regardless of your skills, because of latency, because of packet loss, because of the amount of bandwidth you have available. All of those things become a factor. So for me, when I think about how do we get more kids involved, it's getting more parents and adults on board that this is something that we should do. And then how do we put the infrastructure in place so that we have better connectivity at the schools and kids then have the opportunity to engage? I think once those things are in place, like Mike said, they'll come beating down the door saying, hey, we want to play, we want to participate. The harder part for Alaska is making it be available, especially in, like I said, a lot of the rural, smaller areas. And so with that, I go back to saying for some of you, if you're thinking about this from a business standpoint and where you go, getting people who are naysayers or who are opposed to the idea of esports, especially at schools, and especially as you go younger, right? If you're trying to have a 5th grade team that's going to feed into your high school team, you're going to have to convince people that this is a good thing, that this is something that is really helpful for their kids. And if you can figure out ways to start to shift that, you're going to have a lot of success, because people will jump on board when they see the positive things that can come from esports. And then you'll see the dollars and the legislation and things shift to make it more accessible, where schools can have the kind of connectivity that they need to have. One big step in that this past year was that there was a piece of legislation passed in the state of Alaska to increase the minimum amount of bandwidth for schools from 10 megs to 25 megs. And that's still a tiny amount. Most of you are probably laughing at that, but it's more than double, right? So that the entire school was operating off of 10 megabits of bandwidth. They now get to go up to 25. It's still the entire school. But things like that are the changes that will make this more accessible. Since Bag 25 passed, pretty much everybody has been doing education remotely because of COVID, and they really haven't gotten to utilize that increased capacity. But those are the kinds of things when I think about how does it become more accessible, that's where the business side goes, not just in the recruiting kids.
That's crazy to me. I didn't know that. I think about, I just went through the process of getting internet set up at my house. And I think we have 500 megabit, and we don't, I just like me playing on my phone and my computer for work, and there's really not, and I still complain about lagging sometimes. So that, I mean, the fact that 25, that's just, I mean, that makes sense because of a lot of the remote nature of some of the places in Alaska, but that was an eye opener for me. Mike, you had a visceral reaction to some of the things that Heath was saying there. Did you have anything to add?
I've heard these conversations about doing divisions by bandwidth and capacity as opposed to student population, and that just, to me, it's just a no-brainer. That's where your competitive equalizer is, because it doesn't matter what the talent of your players are if someone has significantly more consistent internet. And I think that was something that we found when we were competing last year in the high school. And then I'll echo the thought. I think I coached the high school team, but I was actually a middle school teacher, so I kind of saw the middle school side where, I mean, it was absolutely mind blowing, and to try to get parents on board, because not that they're necessarily skeptical of esports, but you've got these students who are, they're under 13 and they're signing up for all these accounts that they have to be 13 and over to register for, and then parents get concerned about what's going on. So yeah, educating parents and getting them on board is going to be huge going forward. Because yeah, there's a lot of gamer parents out there who are nerdy and they kind of get it, but there are so many who this is just a completely foreign language. And they're understandably skeptical. They see the stereotypes of kids, sitting in their basement drinking Mountain Dew and playing games till 1 a.m. And it's going to take people to actively convince them otherwise, to show them why it's a good thing and get them invested. So yeah, I just kind of wanted to echo that. I saw that very much from the K-12 level.
Well, and I think that leads right into my next thought, honestly, with you, Mike. I mean, having been at the middle school level, at the high school level, and now at the university level, I think you have a pretty good idea of the landscape of esports and gaming in Alaska. What opportunities currently exist for K-12? Maybe we'll just focus on high school. What kind of opportunities currently exist for high school, and what would you like to see as, like, in maybe the next 10 years? What would you like to see as an appropriate amount of growth for those opportunities and additional opportunities to come down the pipeline?
I think when I look at what some schools have done in the lower 48 versus what we've done here, I can't actually wait to hear what Heath has to say about this because this is his tech side of things. I think Alaskans, like we've had to embrace tech a lot faster than maybe a lot of people in the lower 48. We rely on our technology to get a lot of stuff done because otherwise things would take impossibly long or impossible to do altogether. And so I think that kind of lends itself to I think I saw a lot of growth last year on the esports side of getting the teams together, trying to figure out the connectivity and all those kind of things. But the world of esports is just so much wider than that. And I think it appeals to a lot of things that our students are interested. Like when I talk to my middle school students about what they wanted to do when they grew up, whether you want to consider it reasonable or unreasonable, they didn't want to be a famous football player. They wanted to be a famous YouTuber. They wanted to be a famous streamer. They wanted to have this content creation. They wanted to have the famous TikTok or Instagram account and go viral. And while I'm not sure how many of them will stick with that after they grow up and do whatever, I think it kind of speaks to where our students are at. And to me, like, I think that is the next logical step of, all right, so we're going to have these esports programs, but then, why not record these things? Why not learn video editing? Why not add commentary and give your communications, your student newspapers or whatever, journalism thing they've got. I think kind of just expanding those opportunities for students who don't necessarily identify as that hardcore gamer, because not everyone is, and that's okay. I think just enabling those opportunities, I think would be really exciting to see over the next 10 years. Because I also think that's where the business is kind of growing too, right? We're not just, the esports world is not just growing because people are playing more games and getting better at them. There's this whole infrastructure that's around it, that's really enabling it. And even when I think of the Alaska esports scene at the high school level, right now they're supporting 3 games. And I mean, there are countless games. There are new games. There's probably a new game that came out since the Zoom call started that's going to be popular in a way that's unpredictable. And esports has to be ready to pivot with that. And I think that's something that traditional sports hasn't always been able to do. You're my basketball folks, so I don't remember when the 3-point line came into existence, but it wasn't always there. But then we chucked it in and made things interesting. I feel like esports is doing that every few months, where you just see them tweaking things here and there, launching new games, launching updates. So I think that the most important thing that esports can do from that standpoint of comparing to traditional sports is making sure that we're just being flexible. We're not just saying, hey, we're going to focus on the tech requirements for this game and focus on getting players that want to play this game, because that's not what the middle school kids are playing, and that's not what the middle school kids are going to be playing 3 years from now or 6 years from now. So I think just kind of enabling a system that is flexible enough that we can say whatever the interest is, whether it's in the state level, whether that's worldwide and global, especially as the technology keeps getting better and better, we are able to compete with further away places. I don't know. I think that's going to be really key to be flexible, to say it again.
Sure. Heath, current opportunities and what you'd like to see in the future?
Yeah, I think flexibility is one way to say it, as Mike's saying. I would say even more so is adaptability, because you honestly have to adapt to. I've been all over this state, and we have a football field that you can stand on the football field and punt or throw the football into the Arctic Ocean. I've been on a basketball court in a school where the 3-point lines touch at half court. And then there's, you get on a plane and you land and you go play the same school that's in the same conference, and they have an NBA regulation size court. And you go to play, and it's like, you have to adapt to whatever the circumstances are. And I think that's one of the things that I really like about esports, is how quickly it forces you, no matter what game you're playing, to adapt to what's happening. I mean, that's competition in general. When you're responding and adapting to what your competition is doing, it pushes you to achieve something you wouldn't have otherwise ever been pushed to do. That's what makes competition so great and makes us progress in those areas. When it comes to how does Alaska do this, again, you're gonna have to be creative, and you're gonna have to be willing to try some things that people haven't tried elsewhere. Putting a football field up on the spit of land up by Barrow was absurd, but ESPN got involved, and NFL Films, and all these people became a part of it, and they figured out a way to have a blue turf football field in the Arctic Circle, literally the football throwaway from the Arctic Ocean. things like that, where people are willing to take risks and willing to be adaptable, are what is going to be necessary. And I think that the environment of esports creates that inherently by playing, by learning to work together, and then to take that into the business world and transfer it to a way where if you can figure out a solution for some of the problems that currently exist, there's your business model, especially if it's scalable and it's something that you can replicate. I will also say within that, as the technology continues to develop, there will be more and more opportunities. Whether GCI is the next one we're about to build fiber out to Dutch Harbor on Alaska, which is in the middle of the Aleutian Islands. But Starlink has also got satellites up in the sky now for low Earth orbiting satellites, which are going to provide way better connectivity and bandwidth than places that are currently only connected by satellite. Those kinds of changes are happening already, and they're going to continue. So with an eye towards what is currently available, but also what's coming, and how can we adapt the model to fit in the circumstances, whether that's building a smaller court so we can still play, or figuring out an asynchronous way where maybe we do some console gaming because we don't have the greatest connectivity right now, but then whenever we do have the opportunity to connect with another school, that's what we play. Not being afraid to take those risks and figuring out ways to adapt, especially in Alaska, is going to be critical.
I think one point to add, in general, in my eyes, as an outsider, Mike, you'd kind of touched on the fact that there's so many different titles. I think that's especially in esports, that you have first-person shooter games, which, maybe not the best at high school or competition level, but still you have that capability. You also have the fantasy gaming. You also have traditional sports gaming like NBA 2K and Madden. And then you have the stuff that's in between. Rocket League, kind of in the sports, kind of not, in all these different areas that I think expand different interests. So Heath, you're not a gaming guy per se, but you're a basketball guy. Well, there's an opportunity for that, right? For students who might not be interested in League of Legends, which is a much more of a fantasy focused game. So to me, I think that's such a huge difference as somebody who's lived in traditional sports my whole life, that you can't really offer is like esports as an umbrella that has all these. You might be interested in football or baseball or basketball or golf or whatever, but those are all very separate. Esports is one umbrella that can kind of encompass each one of those, which really, in my eyes, gives it limitless opportunity if everyone can kind of get on the same page, which seems to be the biggest issue, not just in Alaska, but worldwide in esports, is who's doing what, where, when, and how, and really where's the money going is kind of the business side of esports that's still kind of figuring out. But I wanted to add that because I thought it made a lot of sense. When you start talking about opportunity, Mike, I want you to touch a little bit on, for students who are involved in Alaskan esports at the university level, or students who want to get involved more with I know you're involved in the esports scene and esports club. What are some of the ways, whether it's in Anchorage or whether it's in Fairbanks, that students can get involved in esports on campus?
Sure. So students who are on campus, we're very excited that in the very near future, like literally when I came here to get on this call, they were starting to set up computers in our new esports arena. So those are going to be all wired up. So we'll have 12 PCs here, on the campus. We're going to have 4 TVs and consoles all set up. And kind of to what you were saying, like whether people are interested in playing FIFA, playing NHL, playing League of Legends, whatever these things are that people are wanting, we think we've got something that everybody can get involved in. Whether they're looking to bring their game to the next level, whether they're learning to find a first game because they don't know even what's out there, and they've only heard a couple of these titles and don't realize that even though they might not consider themselves a hardcore gamer yet, they just need to find that game. I think as much as the pandemic has hit everybody in different ways, I know a lot of the collegiate tournaments haven't been happening as regularly, or they've been postponed, or we've been getting new dates, or the dates keep moving. At the same time, gamers have found a way, right? Like, and to Heath's point, Alaskans even more so have found a way. So I found that, a lot of the students here at Fairbanks, whether it's connecting with other universities in the system, whether it's connecting with other people who are local in the area who aren't able to come to campus, but we can still play remotely. Discord is a popular app that gamers like to use. It's if you're familiar with Slack or any of those Basecamp, everybody's got their own favorite go-to app these days, I feel like. But if any of those that you're not familiar with Discord, that's kind of what it is, but gamers like to use it. They still are playing games. I'm sure if I hopped into Discord right now, there'd be a group of people looking to play any of the titles that we've just mentioned, looking to connect with folks. And so it's interesting to see how, even though, our physical space is still getting finished up and we'll have some limitations just due to safety protocols when it is open, it hasn't stopped. I mean, it hasn't been business as usual, but still business has gone on. So I think that's kind of been the important thing. So whether they're connecting with us on social media or connecting with us in any of those ways, even our distance learners have been able to kind of still be a part of that gaming community and help us continue to grow, figuring out what direction, what games we want to compete in next year as things continue to evolve. It's been fun to be a part of that process. This is all new. As I literally moved to Fairbanks 6 months ago and helped get all this stuff rolling. So it's been fun to see that even though there have been a lot of roadblocks because of worldwide issues, it hasn't stopped us from trying to do some cool stuff here.
So as we talk, we're now talking kind of university side. We've talked high school and youth. Heath, I want to throw it to you as, this is actually a submission from one of the participants ahead of time, but if you were encouraging an individual to get into esports and knowing what you know today, what type of preparation, whether it's classes or organizations, would you encourage individuals to look at as they start looking at the world of gaming, tech, and esports post-grad?
That's a good question. I think Mike hit on something that I've witnessed with my kids who are getting more into gaming and playing, and that is all of the apps and all the opportunities that surround esports that aren't the games themselves, but things like Twitch, I think, was the first one where everybody was streaming and talking, but now Discord's becoming bigger, and knowing where those other opportunities lie that maybe aren't the biggest or the most obvious that everybody's going to go for, but finding where is there something that I can tie into that I'm really passionate about. And when you get into that realm of talking with the people who are doing those things that you're interested in, you'll start to see, oh, this is a place where I can really fit or where I can really thrive. And sometimes that means starting something from scratch. And sometimes that means hearing somebody else's idea and partnering with them to make it a reality. And I'll give you an example. When I moved to Alaska 11 years ago, there wasn't a whole lot of local sports programming on television. So I partnered with a friend. We started working with different entities in Anchorage, and we got a contract to do broadcasting for all the UAA sports as well as high school games. And so then we would travel around and we would do the broadcast and we would do the commentary together. And then we would take those highlights and we created an Alaska version of Sports Center where we would take all the highlights from the game footage that we had and we would build out a twice weekly highlight show of what was happening in the world of sports in Alaska. It was totally, we were making it up as we went, we were figuring it out, but it was wildly popular because people started to see their local teams and they started to connect with something that just wasn't there before. The idea already existed, and it wasn't, I didn't move here thinking that was something that I was going to do, but I got here, I got into the sports world and I started talking with other coaches and other people, and I realized there's nobody doing this until I met the guy who was wanting to do it, but he needed some help. And I was like, all right, here we go, let's do that. I think in the world of esports, because things are so new, especially in Alaska, those opportunities are everywhere. You just got to go start talking to people, and getting into those conversations will help guide you to what's really missing, what's the next step, and who else wants to help make this happen. I think there's lots of ripe opportunities. You just gotta start asking.
Yeah, I think the creative thinking, right? It's the ingenuity, it's the entrepreneurship almost, that there are clearly enough people interested in it, and there are enough people that want to be a part of it. The challenge is getting everyone, or just finding one or two people to work together with to potentially figure out what that idea is and run with it. Mike, did you have anything to add as far as students wanting to work in esports and gaming in the future, what they should be doing now to shape that?
Yeah, I'll give a couple things, but I also just kind of wanted to echo. I do think another thing that's so uniquely Alaskan is just like that will make it happen approach. Like if there's a void of things, people don't go, oh man, I really miss what people might lament that they miss it from the lower 48, but they don't stop there. They do something about it, right? They find a way of bringing whatever that void is, whatever Alaskan way we can, and whatever spin on it. So I think that's just another thing I appreciate. But I think to kind of echo other sentiments we've said, but I just really want to hammer it home because I think it's just really important. Esports is so broad. When we think of like, you know, the overall body of esports, it doesn't exist because there's so many different facets. So whatever angle someone wants to take, it does not matter what game they take, what genre of game they take, where those gamers are, because there are like, I could go down for days listing all these, you know, whether it's the live YouTube stuff, Facebook's been trying to get in on it, et cetera, et cetera. There's an avenue forward. So I think it's about figuring out that passion that you're like, all right, what am I willing to spend that extra time on, putting that extra effort in, because there's gonna be room at the table for whatever that is. And which that's really nebulous, and I hate to give that as advice because it is so nebulous. But I just mean it. Looking at how new the growth is, how interested people are in on it. If you're willing to kind of say, hey, here's my area of expertise, here's where I want to see this grow, and here are the avenues that I think are available to grow. I think people are listening to those ideas right now, and willing to kind of help you take that next step to figure out what it can be, and whether that means it's a new thing, whether that means collaborating, all things that Heath said. I think it's just having that willingness to say, wow, you know, like, I think, you know, I only really like this really game that I think is super niche, and I'm sure no one else is going to really want to hear a podcast about this game. Well, I'm sure you go on Reddit and there'll be, you know, 100 other people who actually are passionate about that and really want to talk to you about it and want to help you explore those ideas. So I think it's just kind of having that bravery to say, I want to talk about my passion with other people, and seeing where that gets you, because I think it's just going to keep opening doors, because esports is just at that cusp where it is just exponentially growing. But it's not like it's a race to mine all the gold. It's just a continuously growing thing where we keep expanding, because it's not that new games keep replacing old games. People keep playing the old games and playing the new games. So it just there's growth there, and you just got to be willing to have some fun with it, and show people that you're willing to be a little vulnerable and passionate about it.
I want to go back to whoever asked the question. This will be my simple answer to it. Business 101. It's so much more about who you know than what you know. So you talk about going on and getting more education and getting more things. That's great. But if you already know what you need to know, and you find the right people who want to help you make that happen, that's your recipe for success. Not more degrees, more certifications, more things, but never sharing any of that with anybody. You got to get in contact and connect with the right people to help you take what you know and turn it into something. And that's a cliche, but it is so true, that I've seen proved over and over and over again. It's so much more about who you know. So take the opportunity while you're in this unique spot in the School of Business focusing on esports. Get to know the people that you're studying with. Get to know as many people as you can, because you never know down the road what opportunities that might open.
It's the hustle factor, right? It's the hustle factor. And I think that's, even if you're not interested in esports, if you're just on this because it was a required part of your course, if there's one thing that you can take away, is that that's any facet, right? It's if you're working in traditional sports, if you're working in esports, if you're working in any area of the business world, period, knowing people and ways that you can get in, hustling to get there, is the most important factor in anything that you're going to find, in my experience. So I'm going to shut up. We have about 12 minutes, 15 minutes left in this session. I want to give the group the opportunity to chime in and ask any questions. So if you have any questions, please feel free to jump in. Otherwise, I'm a sales guy. I can keep talking if I need to, but I prefer not to if we don't have to. But with that, I will leave the floor open. If anybody wants to ask a question, please feel free to jump right in.
So you're talking about these esports getting started in some of these high schools in rural areas. What sort of interest or participation have you seen already? I'm in a very rural area and I've got a kid that's going into high school, so it's pertinent.
Do you mind if I ask
my
what
interest
area
here?
you're in?
Sports and recreation with an emphasis on the recreation, but my end game here is to work with the kids in some manner, whether it be at the rec center or the schools or somewhere.
Yeah, where in the state are you?
Bethel, like a way out.
Okay, so in general, I would say that the response has been huge. Everybody is interested in offering it. More so in rural, honestly, they're more interested in offering it because they recognize that they don't have many things offered currently. In Anchorage and Fairbanks and Juneau, yeah, it's another something to offer, and they actually have it's a very easy thing for them to kind of turn on because they already have what they need. In the rural areas, everybody is interested. I say everybody, almost everybody is interested in adding this. They've just been trying to figure out how do we do it, and is there a way that the playing field is going to be balanced, because we know we can't compete with Anchorage because of the connectivity speeds and that which is completely out of their control. So in the Bethel area, I know that LKSD has been interested and with all their schools and trying to get it rolled out. What that looks like in, again, going back to the connectivity for us, Bethel is a cable modem market. So they have cable modems and the school has good connection. That would be a very similar experience to playing anywhere on the road system. If you go to one of the smaller villages outside of Bethel, it goes to rural broadband, which is a wireless connection, and it's going to be drastically slower. You're going to have a lot more latency, and you're going to have to deal with weather being a big factor in that too, because it's all line of sight connectivity. So where you are changes, and all that is saying from the home, right? I'm not talking about from the school building. I'm talking about if kids are trying to play from their home right now. When they're in the school, they're all going to have hard connections. The least case being microwave, or unless you're in a really, really rural spot, it'll be satellite.
Gotcha. Yeah, that might be something I want to, maybe address further down the road with the school board here or the school system. Thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions?
Well, we're oh, go ahead.
I have a question.
I have a question too. No, that's okay.
Mine's quick. So, VR is really coming on now, and my kids are at home playing Beat Saber and all sorts of stuff, and they're like totally into Rocket League and everything. Do you think VR will get as big as this, and will there be a place like a UAF to do that sort of stuff too?
I'm hoping so. I was actually joking with somebody the other day that I think I don't remember how long ago this was, but ESPN introduced their ESPN 3D channel, and they was going to sell all the 3D TVs, and it was going to be the next big thing. And it was a little too soon. Not everybody was ready for it, but now VR. I mean, so like you said, VR is in not everybody's homes, but it's easily accessible in the home. People can buy kits online. It doesn't require a lot of background. And we're seeing it. Yeah, like people are playing Beat Saber. Rock Band is a kid's toy compared to these VR rigs. So I think it's something that we're at least speaking from the UF side that we'd really love to see incorporated here. And what that looks like, again, it's so hard to say because when your kids might be coming up into the college level, it might be totally different of what the VR competition looks like. So yeah, I mean, it's something that I think would be exciting to see because I think that we are getting there. But man, it's really hard to guess where that would be.
Mark, I don't know if I can speak to UAF. You know far better than I do, but I would say that in terms of just VR in general, yes, I see that growing. I see that as connectivity becomes better and better, there will be more live things that are done through VR. But I agree with Mike. I think that the jump to VR is a very different experience. And so some people have been a little bit slower, but I do think that as a market as a whole is going to continue to grow and see a lot more traction.
One thing that I'll add to that, Heath, what I remember reading a paper on VR recently, in that the biggest challenge I think with VR is that your body can only stay inside of that VR world for so long before you start to totally lose perception. And they've found that there's a certain limit that people can handle with VR right now, that could evolve. But as of now, you still have a cap on how much time you can spend with those goggles on before you have to take a break, because you start to lose all senses. So I think that could be a natural barrier, but to your point, it's something that's growing very quickly, and I think will have a place in the spectrum of esports as we move forward. I just don't know what the ceiling looks like compared to other areas, in my opinion.
Oh, you want a business model? Go watch Ready Player One and figure out how to make VR that real, and then you'll be telling us all what to do. So, Teresa, you have a question?
Yeah, I did. I was just going to mention Ready Player 2, which is also very made me a little scared. So I'm curious about the communication and marketing aspect. And I think all of the panelists talked about the need to communicate to the older generations. And I work with our alumni, our 30,000 plus UAF alums. And I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts about, how, first of all, our board is very supportive of the new Esports Center, made a philanthropic gift towards it. How can we be ambassadors, and how can we start to, get the stories out that my board immediately, identified with, and it wasn't a hard sell for them, and they're the demographic you're talking about.
I'll jump in on this real quick first. I bring this up every chance I get, so I just have to do it. So I think one thing that also makes Alaska really unique is that they've already embraced gaming in a way that most other places haven't. I think if you're on this call and from Alaska, you might already be familiar, but there's a game called Never Alone. And yeah, it's a puzzly game and it's a platformy game, but more so it was a game that told native stories in a unique way and didn't just rely on the traditional storytelling methods. It allowed them to capture their culture in a video game. And I think that that's kind of opened eyes to people of what the gaming community can bring, not just Alaska, but anybody, because now, and I know people in the lower 48 that have played that game and learned about Alaskan culture just from being immersed in that world. And I think that as we continue to be open-minded, think creatively, and think about how games can I don't want to say interact with people is not the right word, but apparently the coffee's running low. But influence and give people experiences. I think we're going to continue to see people learn because I think that the gaming, when people have gamer, if they're not on board immediately, it's because they have those negative stereotypes in mind. They had these negative associations. They remember old articles on NBC in the 90s talking about linking violence to video games, even though it's been dissuaded through research a bunch of times. So I think it's just kind of continuing to show them the counter examples, because they are out there and they're continuing to come out. And I think that those are the really powerful messages that say not only are the stereotypes and the way you're thinking are wrong, but there's so much positive and good that you can use if you take the time to learn about these resources and readily utilize them.
Heath, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I'll answer that by saying I grew up, I can't tell how old most of the people are on here because all I'm seeing is names. But when I was growing up, we had an Atari, and I think I was in maybe junior high, early high school when it first came out of the box after having sat in our closet for like 15 years, never been opened. The brand new Atari. And my dad's whole deal was, well, if you hook that up to the TV, it messes up the TV. So we're not doing that. So it came out of the box. I looked at it for like 5 minutes and then it went into the trash. So that was the life of the first video game console that was in my house. My whole upbringing was that we're not playing video games, we're not doing that, right? And here I am talking about it today because I do believe that, like I said earlier, the benefits already align with the goals that we have in other places. And so the key for getting more people to transition is exposing them to the games themselves. At our booth at ASTI for the last couple of years, when we get people to sit down and they have a student next to them and they start playing with a student, Rocket League's by far the easiest to get people into it, but to have them sit down and they get to play and they have a student teaching them and showing them how to play, this button does that, like just getting them into that, they start to see, oh yeah, I've never done this before. Maybe I was a little bit too judgmental, and but man, this kid sure is passionate about it. And then we've had some of them get really excited and into it, and they start yelling at other people while they're playing because it just gets a hold of you when you start playing, right? That competitive nature. So I think that level of exposure is one piece. Then within that, how you frame that it already aligns with what you're doing, that it's not an extracurricular thing, that it's a co-curricular piece to what the school is all about. And so when you're talking about building a community, when you're talking about exposing students to the opportunities of the future and preparing them for the world of business that is going to exist when they're out, this is what's coming. This is a huge opportunity. And so when if you were to start streaming tournaments or events that you were running and hosting at your event, and you ran commercials mixed in there, right? Like a regular sports streaming, you threw in some commercials which showed the basketball team, the hockey team, some of the other student clubs going on, and esports, and it's all tied into educating and preparing students, and you just start to incorporate it the same. Oh yeah, this is the same. It's not for me, but it's the same. That's a win, right? Because then those people are at least going to say, yeah, this does tie in with what we're doing. Even though I may not be interested, I'm willing to support it.
That's well said. And sounds like me, Teresa, you got to get that board out to this new esports lab you got in Fairbanks. I think that's the best way to do it, is get them, throw them right in the fire and have them figure it out, right? That's when things are back to normal.
We'll get Rocket League set up and we'll have ourselves some fun.
Well, Heath and Mike, this has been fantastic. I know that talking about the landscape of esports in Alaska deserves a lot more than an hour of time, but I think we covered pretty much everything that I wanted to talk about, and I really do appreciate both of you taking the time to jump on. I know we're right at time here, but if there's any parting words that either of you have, I'll give you the floor. Otherwise, we'll let everyone go with the rest of their night. But if you have anything else, please feel free. All right.
I'll throw my email in the chat if anybody wants to know more about the Fairbanks scene or how to get involved in those kind of things. I love talking about this stuff, so please shoot me an email if you're interested.
And I'll say, if you start to come up with those crazy ideas or those things that you want to try or explore that you think would be worth pitching or getting somebody else to talk to about, feel free, reach out and let me know if there's a way that GCI can be a part of that, or if you just have questions. I just threw my email in the chat as well. Happy to help you guys however I can. Don't be afraid to take risks.
Well, that's a perfect note to end it on. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. And for everybody on this call, we'll have the recording. It will be posted on the UAF YouTube page, so keep an eye out for that. But thank you, everybody, for joining, and look out for our next one coming towards the end of March. We will be talking about culture, stereotypes, and other parts of that side of esports as well. So thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day, and look forward to seeing you next time.
Thanks, Travis.
Thanks, guys. Good night.
Good night.